Good evening, brothers and sisters, and our everyday faithful. Welcome to another edition of Everyday Faith. This is your host, Eric Chen, and tonight we have an amazing episode on the shape and the character of spiritual public leadership. Now, one inspiration that I have of spiritual public leadership is that of Jesus. And he said that he came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom of many. And for me personally, Jesus embodied that servant leadership, the giving of yourself, that it's about humility, it's about service. It's not about authority, it's not about power, it's not about status. It's about leading with love, leading with grace, and leading with servanthood. And tonight we will have a special guest whose expertise is not only in engineering, but also in organizations and leadership. His name is Dr. Quintus Jett, and I had the honor of meeting him during the Andrew Yang campaign. And if you've been following my Streamcast, you'll know that I've been meeting a lot of amazing people from the Andrew Yang campaign, but their interests go far beyond the campaign itself. So without further ado, we welcome Dr. Quintus Jett.
Hey, Eric. Hi, good to see you.
Good to see you. Did you watch any of the DNC convention tonight?
Yes, I did. And it was very unexpectedly moving.
Well, tell me a little bit more. Was there a particular segment that was moving to you, especially from the perspective of leadership?
Well, on one hand, I think the roll call of states, which seems like something that should be that could be boring. There was something just inherently interesting to seeing different people from around the country, like and different in different sceneries from different parts of the country. So I think there was that, but in particular, the story of Joe Biden, and especially the story from the perspective of Jill Biden, was touching in so many ways. I think I'm going to have to watch it again, because I think when I was watching it, I think I was just a lot of emotion, a lot of feeling, like the loss in that Biden family, having to overcome loss, and the bonds of family, trust, loyalty, the reasons that we do all these things, the reason that why we have leadership or to organize, it's for this, it's to care for each other and to love one another and to love the earth and life.
Well, I think that's very important in terms of having empathy, having that emotional intelligence, being able to relate to another on that emotional, personal level, that personal touch. And that kind of reminds me of what Maya Angelou said, that we don't remember anything, but we always will remember. I'm paraphrasing that. We'll be remembered by the people who remember us by how we made them feel. Yeah. Right?
Yes.
And I think that was what's surprising to me was Colin Powell coming out. What did you think of that?
Well, I heard just beforehand. So, so I heard about the surprises. So Colin Powell and Cindy McCain, the widow of John McCain, like I'd heard about that, but even that, I don't think I really knew very much about Joe Biden and John McCain, about their relationship. And so that was very touching to me as well.
Right. Well, we're going to get more into that later, more on the Biden-Trump presidential politics, because that'll be very juicy. This is a little hook here. But tell us a little bit more about your background, Dr. Jett.
Well, no, I think in terms of talking about me, I think I'd like to refer to what was going on in the world or the United States about 15 years ago. Because it was 15 years ago was Hurricane Katrina.
Mm.
I'm not hearing any like commemorating of this, but that was 15 years ago. That was in late August 2005.
It wasn't that long ago.
Yeah, it wasn't that long ago. And um, uh, okay, so a couple things about me like are in that. Um, I had no connection to New Orleans. I wasn't from there, but I had seen it. You know, I knew what it was, like in the city and everything. But when it first happened, and sort of the hurricane comes through New Orleans, it actually just misses New Orleans. The levees fell, and there's all this like people who are in need of help. And I just remember there was so much despair and anger and all sorts of emotion just after that. Like in the United States, it's like the issues of race and class, economic divisions, and our helplessness at dealing with it. And so I think an important thing about me is what my reaction was to that. I remember first feeling like, okay, we're all going to end up rushing to blame. Like, right. Who did this? Who's responsible? And all this other stuff. And at the same time, I was like, well, but what about the people? What about all the people who've been displaced? I mean, what's going to happen to them? What are we going to hear their needs? And then what can we do constructively to address it? And so I was a PhD. Well, I was a PhD in organizations, studying issues of like innovation and that kind of thing. And I was really interested in open source software, kind of like what we see with Wikipedia and or what we call crowdfunding. It's like, how do you get these different people coming together on a common purpose? I was really interested in that. And so probably within a few days after the levees collapsed and all that stuff, that's when I felt a sense of conviction, like I'm going to do something. I'm going to do something, and it's going to involve open source. I don't know exactly what it's going to be yet, but because I think there's going to be too many people just talking about blame, and one day we're going to get to that, but we need to think of something constructive to do to help people.
Right, and as you talk about Katrina, I'm kind of reminded and connecting it to even our pandemic today in terms of the disproportional impact upon people of color. Isn't that a big theme in New Orleans too?
Yeah, though the people in New Orleans, as I remember it, there's like a saying that the storm just doesn't discriminate. So if you're poor, it doesn't matter what background you are, you were affected by it. Which actually will tell. Actually, this speaks to another thing, just so you know about me. So I did end up coming up with a project, and I incorporated it into a class I was teaching at Dartmouth College in New Hampshire on engineering management and organizations. And so as a class, we were going to try to create our version of an open source project. And as part of that, I ended up going to New Orleans maybe about 2 to 3 months after the levees fell. And so that's the thing. I mean, there's a part of me that is willing to step outward into the unknown to come up with a solution to help people. And
right. No, I think that's I think you really stepped up as in a position of leadership, because like you said, it's easy to blame X, Y, Z, who's not doing this, who's not doing that. But when you saw the situation, you looked at it and said, how can I be a part of the solution? And I really like the idea of the crowdsourcing, open sourcing, because it kind of it creates a platform for everybody to contribute in some meaningful way, right?
Right. But I think the key thing that I learned about, I'm not sure if what's about myself, but actually I wish I could convey what it was like when I first saw New Orleans, like 2 or 3 months afterwards. I mean, the National Guard was like throughout the city. A lot of people weren't there, patrolling of the streets. A lots of it's like a science fiction movie or something. I mean, there was garbage like everywhere piled on curbsides. I remember I was driven around the city and I actually saw this big, like 2-3 story high wall of just garbage that was being like was a staging area, and just such a large city that was so empty, and so just to take all that in, it was like an area so big and so empty. I felt helpless. I mean, I was like, hey, open source, I had all these ideas, but I mean, I didn't know what to do. And so I can imagine what it was like, whether you were President Bush or Governor Blanco or the mayor of Nagin of the city. You looked at all of this and you just went, that I think people can skip how awesome this destruction was and the displacement to that many hundreds of thousands of lives that happened and was happening then. But what was good though, and this is somehow I can't really take credit because it just sort of happens. Sometimes there's like an insight that kind of comes.
Right.
And so that day I was feeling hopeless and I was driving away from New Orleans. I was staying in Baton Rouge. And then the idea just popped into my head, just like out of nowhere. It's like, what if I were to count the houses? Like, okay, there's a lot of stuff there, but let's pick one neighborhood. Okay, there's 100 houses here. Let's go house to house and maybe count, well, what's the damage? And then we could, we could fix up, a certain percentage of that. And then we can move on to the next one. So just like that, it just came. And that became eventually the basis for the project that I eventually created.
Right. And you have an upcoming book that talks about it, and I got the hashtag "Please Help Me God." Isn't that right? Isn't that right?
Yeah. It's right now it's called "Please Help Me God," walking by faith for a dozen days.
And I read kind of a chapter of your book here that you sent me, which is entitled "Is God Greater Than Tenure?" And in this chapter you sent me, you also talked about, as you mentioned, how helpless you felt, and how your faith played an integral part of this journey in your organization. Would you like to share about that?
Yeah. So what you have is I sent a copy of a academic book chapter that will be published. That's forthcoming at the end of this year in December. It's in a volume called "Blessed Are Those Who Ask Questions." It's on management, spirituality, and there are different authors who talk about the intersection of management, organizations, and faith. And all of our chapters have a title of a question. And so my question was, is God greater than tenure? And
right,
so
what is the book title called again?
Please Help Me God is the book that's coming out, the self-published book. But this particular paper I sent you focuses on that very specific question, that here I was like an academic, professor of management, and yet I had an experience in December of 2006, which really was for me like a walk with God. So when the project, the nature of this project was to go to every house or address in an area called Gentilly. It's a district in New Orleans. And each address, it was like a triage: red, yellow, blue, green. Red if it's devastated, yellow means it's being gutted, blue means it's renovated or occupied, and green means it's a vacant lot. And so the idea was, how do we go house to house in this district of Gentilly, which has had 22 neighborhoods and 15,000 addresses. And so how do we do this as a way of seeing and showing what is needed where, so the people who can come and we can work together to help out the community. That was the basis of it. And that's all based off of open source. But what happened about a year after Katrina, there was a big turn to this. So the project had been created, and we had figured out red, yellow, blue, green, and we had done some trials, like, seeing if it worked. And then pretty much my life just went upside down.
Wow, right.
Yeah, I was a visiting professor at Dartmouth College, and my appointment had expired.
Right.
And I took this sort of half, like a temporary position, like half the pay. And then my marriage began to end.
Wow.
Yeah. So in the midst of all that, that's when I came to be more engaged consciously about my relationship with God. Because I believed in God. I'm African American. My parents, are both from the segregated South. So I believed in God, but I think prior to that, to me, God was sort of like, I pray when I was in trouble, right? Like, oh, something's going to happen. I don't know what to do. I'm so afraid. But this was the time where I began to see relationship with God, God as a relationship. Like, God, what should I do next? Should I stand still? Should I go left? Should I go right? God, what would you have me do to fulfill your will? It's not just about me. And so that was that time. That's why I talk about is God greater than tenure. So me as an academic having this walk of God based off of this scientific project.
Right. And especially you specifically mentioned in this chapter about how many things that were beyond your control seem to be divinely arranged, right? You want to share a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. Oh, want me to share? Okay, all right. I'll share something about the beginning. So originally, I didn't think I could. There's 22 neighborhoods. I can't do all 22, because I didn't really have a team of people. So it was my research assistant, and there was like someone who was an executive from one of the Dartmouth's business school programs agreed to come and help join me. So the plan was I'm going to show up for 2 weeks. I had 2 people. I could maybe get additional volunteers, neighbors or whatever. And I thought I could do one neighborhood. There's a neighborhood in Gentilly called Pontchartrain Park. And it's an historic African-American neighborhood. Lots of seniors live there. And so I thought, okay, if I could go and do red, yellow, blue, green for all of those addresses in 2 weeks, that would be victory. But what happened instead is we ended up doing that neighborhood in 4.5 days. We did another neighborhood about that size in 1 day. And I ended up doing like 5 neighborhoods. We did 5 neighborhoods with just ad hoc with people coming in over the next 2 weeks. And we ended up doing all of Gentilly, like all of it, all 15,000 addresses, 22 neighborhoods. We ended up doing it in 32 days.
Well, and I remember there's one part in your chapter where you said that you needed 50 people. And you're like, well, you had no idea where you're going to get the 50 people. And all of a sudden, this church called and said, we have 50 volunteers. Is that right?
Yes. And there were so many instances like that occurred. Actually, here's one thing. Okay, so at one point during this the travels, I decided to come back. The 2.5 weeks ended just before Christmas, and the idea was, well, let's come back after Christmas and continue. That was the plan. And I asked who could come with me, and there were maybe 4 people who could come back, 4 students, and one of their spouses. And so we buy these last-minute tickets on my credit card, and to come back to New Orleans from New Hampshire, and we take the bus to Boston to go to the airport, and we arrive at the airport. And when we do, at the counter, they say that they tell me that I'm on the flight the next day. That the 4 people that I had gotten tickets for, they were going on the flight that we were planning on it, but I suddenly got bumped to the next day. And we were just like, this can't, and we tried to explain, we're doing this project and we got to do this. And then the gate agent basically put me on that plane again.
Wow. Okay.
And I was sitting next to this woman named Irene, and it turns out Irene is a Catholic. She was born Protestant, but she became Catholic. So I was telling her about this project. I said, "Yeah, we're doing house to house," but also I was telling her the other stuff, like, "Hey, I'm starting to read the Bible for the first time, and all this wild stuff is happening. I just don't." And I'm like, and when we map, I said, "Yeah, Irene, when we map, we go house to house. We do it in pairs." And she looks at me. She's like, "Quintus, you know that the disciples were in pairs." I'm like, "What?" Because I had never read the Bible before. So this was news to me. I had no idea. And so it's like, and so there's a lot of that. I mean, so in hindsight, I think it would be another 6 months after this experience of mapping in Gentili that I really started to realize that I look back at that, what happened. It reminds me a lot of Gideon from Judges. Like basically, like, you know, in the sense that like Gideon had all these doubts and he's like, "Okay, God, what do I do next?" and then you do that next thing, and then just one thing unfolds to the other, and before you know it, you're part of something much bigger and accomplished. You're going into victory like faster and bigger than you ever would have imagined, and you're doing it in a way that you had not conceived of doing it when you started.
So you have these plans and organizations and strategies in place, but turns out God had other plans and grander plans and better plans.
Yeah, God's plan is better than my plan, you know, so so I actually know what that's like. And so I don't think I get too concerned about having to figure everything out. You know, it's like, okay, I just try to be obedient, you know, to this situation. Like, okay, where am I being called to do? Okay, I may not even understand why, but I will listen and discern, and I will move. And this is the opposite of project management. Project management, you have to lay everything out. Well, what are your goals and what are your resources? And and uncertainty is the enemy. You know, like anything can't happen that doesn't be what you're planned. A walk with God, in my experience, is just the opposite of that. You don't have the resources. You have no idea how you're going to do it, but you show up even knowing that you may fail. And sometimes in the beginning, you are failing. But then like these like doors of opportunity, this swing open. You meet people you didn't expect to meet. You get resources you didn't plan for. And all of a sudden, the goal you tried to achieve is already behind you. You've already lost it and moved on to other things.
Well, so what are some of the most, would you say, some important lessons of leadership and public leadership and the spirituality of public leadership from your experience there?
I would say part of it is always remember that it's not about yourself. I mean, it's like whenever I was mapping, I would have sometimes they'd be like some would be students that would be working with me. Some would be like neighbors from Gentili. Sometimes they would be strangers, and it always worked out for me. The people were always first. I mean, there was at least 1 or 2 instances where I had volunteers who really wanted to help me finish Gentili. And they were willing to like, you know, sit out in the dark with flashlights with their clipboards. And I was just like, whoa, you know, now, I mean, yes, there's a goal that, you know, I want to achieve, but yeah, putting people first, you know, it's like, if you're gonna like have like people volunteer with you, yeah, let's think about that. I mean, they're going to need time to rest. They're going to need like food. They're going to need places to go to the bathroom. And, you know, and also too, they may have ideas on how things should be done. Maybe like if they know what's going on, they may say, "Hey, wait a minute. Hey, professor, have you ever thought about doing it this way?" And I think about, hey, that's a great idea. Why not do that?
Well, I really liked the section in which your research assistant, she received a job opportunity that was just the ideal job opportunity.
Yeah, yeah.
And you really put her interest at heart. And you said, you need to pursue this opportunity. And it's nice that you want to postpone it to help with this project. But you were looking out for her. And you said, you know what? You need to do that. And that's more important than the project. So I really thought that was, wow, you really put her career first and putting the people first. So you really put that into action. So I really like that. And I want to transition us to the other topic of, what this means. For example, right now it's the DNC convention in terms of the shape and the spirituality of public service and the public leadership. And for example, you're on the Andrew Yang campaign. You're part of Abundance for America.
Yeah, yeah.
You also are looking at comparing Joe Biden and Donald Trump. So what to you are the most important characteristics of spiritual public leadership?
Well, in terms of the modern politics, I mean, one of the things about Andrew Yang's campaign and the Yang Gang, Yang Gang had there were 6 values that defined the Yang Gang. Humanity first was one of them, and integrity and transparency, abundance, grace and forgiveness. I always get not left, not right, but forward, and math. So there were values. There were specific values, and they weren't just words. There was actually the Yang campaign actually had a brief description of what each one of these terms meant. And so values define a community, and an organization is ultimately its values, and you want to have a strategy. It's practical to have a strategy for what you're doing, but there's a saying in my field that culture eats strategy for breakfast. So in that sense, what made Andrew Yang's campaign so powerful was the culture of being in the Yang campaign, grassroots, in which we connected with each other, and the basis in which we came to each other. The values are really very important, and I think this is playing itself out too with this general election. Joe Biden, it's funny. I would say compared to Hillary Clinton, Biden actually does have a narrative, like a value arc to what he's doing. And it's not recent. He's sort of been talking this way for at least since last year, that basically we are in the battle for the soul of America. And so he's always put it that way. And it's like when we look at some of the things our country has done under this leadership, is this really who we are? Is this really who we? So I think there is an element of spirit going on in this thing. I do in hindsight, I realize that we are also different in the Yang campaign. Like a lot of us who came to Andrew Yang from different political ideologies, I think one of the things that united us was that we all recognized Andrew Yang as a virtuous man. He's a virtuous man, and we trusted him, and so that's why, for me, in a way, when someone says that that now that Andrew Yang's not running, that they're just gonna they were Trump supporters before, and I'm just gonna go back to Trump. I actually, I think I do take a certain moral issue with that. I mean, in the same way that sometimes I go to my white evangelical people I went to church with, and I'm just like, how can you not at least see the fact that the president has a problem with the truth? I mean, he has a problem telling the truth, and so I always wonder about that. It's like Andrew Yang, I mean, if you're attracted to that about him, that he's a virtuous man, how can you not notice that the ways in which Trump does not exhibit virtue at all?
Well, I did. That's interesting you say that, because I did have somebody, Michael, He's a Puerto Rican, Mexican American
Mm-hmm.
conservative, and he said that he does not like Donald Trump at all. Even though he voted for him and still continues to support him, he does not like. He would never want him around his family. He does not see Donald Trump as a person of virtue, but he agrees with his policies. So what do you say to that? What are your thoughts?
I say, whoa, because also I'm coming at this from right now I'm in I mostly come from an African American tradition, and in my church, Open Door Worship Center in Jersey City, New Jersey. If I were to do a private poll, I don't think most people in my church, which is mostly African American, some Latino, I think most people politically do not agree with Trump at all. So this politically we are not. But when our pastor T-Bout says, "Pray for our leaders, pray for President Trump," we do. We do. Even though we agree with him and we think he's doing horrible things, we still pray for him, because it's a big burden for someone to lead a country, and I'm sure he's dealing with all sorts of spiritual warfare on the inside. Who knows? So I think there are ways to reconcile it, and I'll use actually a Biden example too. And it really hurt me that more people didn't understand it when he said it. So Biden had been accused of something by someone.
Right.
And someone had written an article that said, "I believe her," the accuser, "I believe her, but I'm still voting for Biden." And this was brought to Joe Biden, and he said, no. He goes, well, it was number one. He goes, "I did not do this. I did not do what she said. I did not do this. This didn't happen. But if you believe that I did these things," Biden said, "if you believe that I did these things, do not vote for me." From a spiritual sense, that is the right answer. It's like, I didn't do it, but if you think I'm that kind of person who did that, just don't vote for me.
Well, that brings up a very controversial point, and this is very controversial. And that is, well, I've seen articles where they posted that Kamala Harris said that she believes her, or the accuser, which is kind of a moral dilemma. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, I think what we're going to find out is that in certain ways there is a depth to Joe Biden in terms of spirituality and how that plays itself out in a way that a lot of people don't necessarily have, and possibly even his vice presidential choice. I'm just trying to get this. You're a young guy, you're married, and you have your 3 kids, and then there's an accident, and you're like, your wife and your daughter are dead, and you are having to raise your 2 sons. And when you believe in God, what kind of that's really the hard work of faith that I wish as Christians we would talk about more. Actually, any person of faith, that we should be talking about that. It's like, as I'm going through, I'm feeling at least a conviction to sort of, and a pull and a call to go house to house in Gentilly, in red, yellow, blue, green, as I don't have resources for it. I'm in the middle of a divorce, and I have no idea what I'm going to do with myself career-wise and for money. In the midst of all of that, of course, there's this dialogue in your head, like, Lord, why me? Why am I doing this? Should I be doing this? It's like, I hope that maybe at the very least that Biden's story will can lead us all to, maybe, or at least some of us, to really reflect on these questions.
Yeah, and I think something that was very illuminating to me in terms of his leadership, and I think he is not necessarily, in my opinion, the smartest guy on the right. But what I do notice, and if you think about going back to the presidential primary, that he was able to command the respect of his, at that time, political opponents, and he was able to basically call all of them and convince them all to drop out and to support him. So there is something there that now some people say it's the Democratic establishment, say that as you may, or maybe it seems like he has that EQ, the emotional intelligence, to be able to work with other people, and the fact that he's able to command the respect of someone like Colin Powell, someone like Cindy McCain, and that there is some kind of emotional depth or empathy or some kind of emotional intelligence there in terms of that leadership skill. What is the role of that, you think, in your opinion?
Well, yeah, definitely. It's almost like, it's acknowledging that there's a spiritual dimension to things beyond, that just, in other words, it's one thing to sort of say that, oh, this is the way some person has been and they'll never change. But sometimes people do in a way that's surprising. I'll give you an example. So there's Mozart has a play called the Marriage of Figaro. And I'd heard, like, through the movie Amadeus, that basically there was one piece of music that was very moving to one of Mozart's rivals. And I thought it was just the music, that the music was so beautiful and inspired. But then I eventually saw the Marriage of Figaro for real. Actually, I was in South Africa and I saw it played out. And I saw why it was viewed as, that moment was viewed as such a holy moment in the play. In the Marriage of Figaro, there's this guy called the Count. He is a horrible person. He is constantly trying to bed the fiance of someone who works for him, a younger woman. He's indisputably awful this whole play. And so a trick is kind of played on him to see between his wife and that woman that they switch clothes. And there's a moment where the Count, he thinks he's about to, have his opportunity with this young woman he's been lusting after, and he discovers that it's his wife. And in that instant, he's like, oh, a man who throughout this play has no conscience throughout the whole play, and you don't expect him to ever have a conscience, he has one. And his wife forgives him.
Wow.
And I'm just like, whoa. And the thing is, we see this in the Bible too, right? This whole idea, Saul of Tarsus, oh my God. He's known for persecuting Christians.
Killing Christians.
And it seems like he liked it too. And yet this guy has an encounter with Jesus, like after the resurrection, and he flips, and this guy becomes the major force in creating the church.
Yeah, the most New Testament was written by him.
That's deep, right? So I think the real question here, and this is, I know it seems in the white evangelical community, who is Trump? And at least my sense of it, so far as I, try to discern and pray, I don't think Trump has not had his redemption moment. If he has, I think it would be different. If this man, and he has been doing horrible things, and there's the thing in the black church, the devil is a liar, and he does lie a lot, right? And he is cool, and he's all these things. If he were to actually change, could we forgive him? I don't think most people, I think I could, but the thing is, I'm not seeing any signs of that. And the thing is, a lot of that stuff really is in God's hands. I mean, so in the earthly plane, I mean, I hope that, you know, there's an election, and I tonight's the night that I do think that there will be mischief done by Trump and his friends and his family, and a lot of people are cynical, but I do think Biden is going to win. But if Trump himself, I mean, is he going to, if he does shift, it's going to be in a fashion that none of us will be able to predict if he does. It won't be like, you know, like, who knows? I mean, his brother just died. What's going on with him about that? I don't know. I'm not going to assume that he is going to change, and I'm not going to assume that he's not going to change either. Which
right,
is, yeah.
But at least you're open to giving him the opportunity to redeem himself.
Well, yeah, but in a way, I think this comes back to what public leadership has been for me. It's like, you know, sometimes you're going through life and, you know, you don't know what to do, and you ask God, well, what should I do? And, you know, and you're not sure if God's going to, you know, do things and deliver for you now or not. You have no idea. But I find that when I'm in that place, that no matter what happens, like whether things go as I expect or not, whether I suffer or achieve victory, regardless of what happens, I still love the Lord. When I find that when I do that, it ends up working out. And it's a mystery. It's a mystery to me.
Well, that's a very important, I feel like that's kind of underlying theme, is that yes, we try to have a plan, we try to have these objectives, we try to figure out what resources we have, we try to have these metrics of success. And not to say that we shouldn't have these things, but in a way, there's also a force beyond what we can control. And it's the convergence of the supernatural and the natural that kind of creates this new leadership, this public leadership, the spiritual public leadership that confounds imagination, if you will.
And it kind of goes to the challenge that I think the challenge that Jesus puts forth here. I mean, you know, it's the spirit of what we do, even more so than what we do. Like, you know, it's not so much like money is not the root of all evil. It's the love of money that is the root of all evil. And so when at least I know, I think that's a pretty high bar, you know. So it's not like, oh, did I do the right thing, and so then God should reward me. That's not that at all. It's the spirit of the thing. If I'm like giving to people, like, and I have money, I'm just giving it to people, but I'm doing it to manipulate, to make myself look important, that gets you nothing. That, you know. But if you're doing like there's actually someone running for Congress in Tennessee, Blair Walsingham, in District 1. She was telling a story that was really, I mean, to me, captured it. She described having only $25 in her bank account, only $25. And so she has a family, only $25 in her account. And somebody asked her for money, needed $20. And she said to herself, well, this family needs it more than we do, even though we need it. So she gave $20 and she only had $25 in her account, and leaving herself with $5. I mean, that to me is the essence of a faithful life.
Well, I think it kind of captures leadership, spiritual public leadership, is that you're on one hand, you're putting the people first, right? At the same time, you're also taking that, you're making a risky decision rooted in faith. So the convergence of the spirituality, the public interest, and leadership all into one, I think that story captures it well. When we want to wrap it up here, so do you have any parting words of wisdom or shout outs in terms of on this topic for today?
It's been calm my heart the past couple of days. I mean, cynicism is an addiction. being cynical is an addiction, and I think I see a lot of it out there. And it actually hurts me when I see it. I mean, I know that just because I know how being cynical might, you might feel like it makes you feel sophisticated, like you're worldly. But really, whenever I see someone who's really cynical, I just see I see wounds and traumas that haven't been healed yet. So remember that cynicism is an addiction. So if when you see friends that are cynical, realize that and be kind and gentle with them, because there is probably a trauma or a hurt that's really driving that. They need healing, and if you feel when you feel cynicism in your heart, just do what you need to do to get healed.
And actually, Donald Trump's niece wrote a book about him, and it seems like he is also the victim of a lot of trauma from his family too. So maybe that's what the classic saying, hurt people hurt people.
Right.
And maybe this is just a call to that spiritual public leadership starts from within, that we need to pursue our own healing. We need to pursue our own emotional health, our own spiritual well-being, our own physical health. And that when we lead from within, maybe that's where it needs to start.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for your time, Dr. Jett. And
sure.
I look forward to talking to you some more. And I know God has a lot of plans for the both of us.
Indeed. Right.
Amen.
So thank you again. God bless.
Okay. God bless. All right. Well, what another incredible story and another incredible journey of faith. And the closing thought, my final thought here is, as we're talking about President Trump, and to pray for him, regardless of which side you're on, whether you're for him or against him. And I'm reminded of the time that I went to Episcopal church service, and they always say that we can go to pray for your leaders and to pray for our president, Donald. And that always struck me, to pray for him by his first name, that we pray for our president, Donald J. Trump. And so maybe that's my final thought of the day, is that let's give everybody a chance. Not to say I like him. I personally don't. Other people do, and I respect everybody's political opinions. But regardless of where we stand, we can all pray for him. And that's another edition of Everyday Faith. Thank you, good night, and God bless.